So inflation, what was John Maynard Keynes's position on inflation? Now, John Maynard Keynes is probably one of the most influential economists of the 20th century. And most economists in America, or at least the most of the economic language, context, and jargon is very influenced by John Maynard Keynes. Especially his views on spending, inflation, and government influence into the economy. He believed into a positive direction. He also believed in the idea of stimulation of an economy, not just through government spending, but through government debt. And that also included printing. Now, printing of money at any level causes inflation. Now, inflation, a lot of people sometimes think is rising prices, and inflation often leads to rising prices, or that's a symptom. But inflation itself is what is done to the money. Inflation is what is done to the money supply. Inflation is an artificial increase in the money supply without the requisite increase of goods and services in the economy. And while that may sound complicated, it's actually fairly simple. It's an increase in the amount of available money to buy the same amount of goods and services. And therefore, the response is either the goods and services are bought up at a lesser price, or the prices have to rise to reflect that reality. Now, this often happens where the money is not distributed evenly. Prices rise while others who hold their money in savings, which is not just wealthy people, but anyone who holds onto money during the process of inflation at any amount, has the amount of their purchasing power depleted from their money. So, for example, let's say if you have $1 and you're holding it in your pocket, and inflation goes up by 50%. So usually something that you would buy for $1 has responded to inflation by raising the price 50%. You still have $1. Now the cost is $1.50. So basically, out of your money, 50% of that dollar value has been depleted. Now, normally it's not that dramatic. In addition, these effects of inflation aren't usually evenly distributed, meaning the people who get the money first before the market catches up with what has been done to the money supply and inflation, they get the benefit of using the money when it still has a greater purchasing power. Now, Keynes, I don't know if he was totally in favor of inflation, but he believed in a system of inflationary money supply and government stimulus into an economy. He says in his book, and there's an excerpt I have from it here, which I just thought was a telling quote from this economist, with whom I have much disagreement, but I think here he hits the nail right on the head with this key quote from his book, The Economic Consequences of Peace, in 1919. This is page 235. Now, this is an excerpt from this book. But anyway, he writes here, Lenin is said to have declared that the best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency. Meaning, if a capitalist system were to come down, and you had someone like Lenin who was trying to infiltrate the system to cause it to collapse in order to replace it with another type of economic system, you have to attack the money itself. You have to deal with the money, people's trust in the money, the value of the money, and the money cannot be independent of the state. Now, this is the key point, what Keynes says here, of what he said about Lenin said, and he agreed with Lenin on that point, and so do I, strange as it may seem. But he says, now Keynes says here, goes by a continuous process of inflation, which is an artificial increase in the money supply without the requisite increase of goods or services in the economy. Okay, so it's a devaluing of the money, taking a value out of the money in order to, it's a hidden tax in a sense. Now, listen to what he says, what he describes, and I agree 100% with his analysis here economically. He says, by a continuous process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. By this method, they not only confiscate, but they confiscate arbitrarily. And while the process impoverishes many, it actually enriches some. The sight of this arbitrary rearrangement of riches strikes not only at security, but also at the confidence in equity of existing distribution of wealth. Now, there's a lot of talk about income inequality and distribution of wealth and all those things. But Keynes believed, and I think his economic analysis at this particular point is dead on, that the hidden tax of inflation is a tax against the wealth of the citizens, such that it is what is the greatest driving factor of economic inequality, because it takes the savings, the pool of savings of the citizens, the regular people, and it depletes those and shifts the wealth to the rich, wealthy, powerful, and politically connected, who get the advantage of getting to use the newly printed, or in the case of the modern monetary policy, it doesn't even have to be literally printed. It can be printed through a computer. They get to use the money while it's still valuable. They get to always print more and enjoy the benefits of that, while shifting the wealth out of the middle class, out of the poor, and creating a system of divergent inequality without people fully noticing what's going on. They may feel a sense of inequality. They may feel a sense of unfairness. They may notice that their money's not buying as much, but they don't realize that they've been taxed secretly, unobtrusively, through the government printing press. That the government gets to print up all this new money for use for the politically well-connected, and in doing so, gets to secretly move the wealth out of the savings accounts of citizens and enriches some at the expense of the many. So Keynes is right. They confiscate it. They take it secretly, unobserved, an important part of the wealth of their citizens, which means that the savings of Americans, by which interest rates are supposed to be determined, and people have enough money to protect themselves and are encouraged to save and invest and do things at the right time, that has been removed from them, having all kinds of other economic consequences, and they confiscate arbitrarily, and it impoverishes anyone to whom it's done, while it enriches some. He says the sight of this arbitrary rearrangement of riches strikes not only at the security, meaning your property, your wealth, your money, your savings, is touchable by this very simple act of government financial policy, but also at the confidence in equity in the existence distribution of wealth, meaning people start to lose confidence in the system. They start to recognize the inequality of wealth, but they start to attribute it to other causes instead of recognizing what's been done through monetary policy in order to bring them to that place of dissatisfaction. So I think on this point, Keynes on inflation, at least in this particular set of sentences, is dead on as far as his economic analysis of what inflation is and what it does and the consequences that it creates.